Um, in case you jumped on before I actually hit record, a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. And then I'm waiting a few minutes so that we could have board members on the meeting. Um, thank you. Somebody just dropped a treat out for me. Um, so the board members can be present before we start in the agenda. I do believe that both are planning to be here, so I'll give them a few minutes. Well, to be respectful of everyone's time, we'll go ahead and get started. And the first portion of the agenda is just to review or update everyone as far as the board approving the repurposing of Kennedy. I'll give an overview of what that means, answer any questions that may be coming up for this committee. And then the second part that we'll spend time is talking about what it means for this team to take on a comprehensive evaluation of boundaries at the elementary level as our next task, and just getting an idea of what information you feel like you will need so we can prepare for future meetings. And I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like based off what we've done in the past. And some members on here who were on here when I wasn't previously can chime in as well. So if you're not aware, Monday, the board did approve to repurpose Kennedy. And what that means is that the students at Kennedy will now attend Prairie Park, Courtly in New York. 78 students, based off the projections, current enrollment and projections, would go to Prairie Park, 75 to Courtly, and 19 to New York. Those families will be contacted if they're not already have been contacted directly so that they are aware which school is now their home school. And then transition activities will begin to be planned. We are working with the staff now. They were sent a preference survey yesterday, or based off the current openings in the district at the elementary level, and given an opportunity to rank their preferences. And then we announced to Kennedy and Prairie Park staff today, it'll probably be in a daily bulletin tomorrow, that Shalita Middleton, who's the principal at Kennedy currently, will be the new principal at Prairie Park. So that's big picture where we are. Are there any questions, things that wonderings or follow-up information? I may or may not have it, but if that anyone on this committee needs or
This is Megan. I had a quick clarification in terms of budget. I know that the number was 1.2, I believe, was the 1.2 million, 1.3 million. Thank you, GR. And that it was going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $700,000 in savings with closing of Kennedy. Is the remainder of that recouped through, I'm assuming, rental fees to outside businesses for moving into Kennedy? How is that? And I know this isn't necessarily a boundary committee, but I was curious if that could be spoken to briefly.
that will come from additional cuts or other things that already occurred. For example, middle school staff was reduced, I think, by 10, so that'll be added to it. We can't make a profit as a nonprofit public organization off of a community center. I think that may be some misinformation out there. The repurposing really will be a collaboration with the preschool early childhood community in Lawrence to provide a service and a resource that the community needs. The district will not make a profit to cover any shortfalls that we have, because legally we cannot do that. We're not a for-profit organization. And the timeline for that, there may be people in there in August if things happen, but it may be December or whomever before the first, like that convening of all of the different people has to occur, but that's not something that the district is necessarily facilitating. We're a partner in it.
Hey, Anna, sorry, real quick. Larry contacted me. He's having trouble getting into the room. He said he had the email, but it wasn't letting him in. So I don't know if you could keep an eye open for him he said he tried to call Dawn, but she didn't.
Yep, Dawn is out. If he has the link, I'll try to resend it to him. He has the email. I wonder, I need to look and see which email she put, because his old email comes up. I'm gonna look and see
Okay.
email she put in there.
All right. Thank you.
He's actually not on the email. If anybody has the attendee, if you can send it to Larry, then I can
I'll
move.
send it.
Okay, as for an attendee, not for a panelist. The panelist, he would actually have to be put in and Don organize it. But if you send them the attendee link.
Okay, well, I only have the panelist one, but his name is on there.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, Larry Engelbrick, Larry.Engelbrick.
All right, if you can keep communicating with him, I don't know how to help him. Okay, any other questions? Thanks, Megan. Any other questions about Kennedy related to boundary, not related to boundary, before we move to the discussion of our next charge? Okay, so Monday night, Board President Kelly Jones, either in the discussion or in her commentary, made the request that we do a comprehensive boundary look at the elementary level. And all of you have the information or the report from RSP that shows how our elementaries capacity-wise look. And then one of the things that I think I just want to kind of share is our centrally located schools during the bond that passed, when all the schools, elementary schools were touched or enhanced or remodeled, were built out so that we can shift boundaries from west to east and balance out like school size. If I'm misspeaking, GR, Ron, because I think one of you all may have been on those committees, please interject. So Hillcrest, Sunset, Schwagler, and Pinckney currently all have space to add additional students. What we can do as a group, Zach is not on tonight, but he, in the future, he can bring forth scenarios based off their projections and capacity of how the boundaries could be shifted in order to move students from west to east in that and what it means. In addition to that, we also got a request from a community member to look at adding students. It was a parent connected to Pinckney to look at adding more students to Pinckney because they have the capacity. So it goes hand in hand with this request. So those are like our 4 centrally located schools if you start to shift boundaries. So I will pause there and see if you have questions about the capacity. All of them do have the capacity to add students. I don't have that number for you tonight, but we can definitely have, based off of projections, how many students could they be shifted there and it's sustained without having to go back and adjust boundaries based off of all of the projections that RSP shared. And then how does that, with Hillcrest specifically, intersect with the current Kennedy and Prairie Park students who would be next year would be Cordley Prairie Park students? What does that mean for them as far as ESL students who are bused to Hillcrest, because then that opens up more capacity at Hillcrest if the Prairie Park students went to Cordley. But those are all the different scenarios that we can look at and talk about. During a process like that, what we would do is, based off the scenarios that we come up with, we would then talk to not necessarily this whole group, but like we engaged the Kennedy staff and families around, this is what it looks like, this is how it impacts you. We would have to build out a timeline to make sure that we were communicating the information, the impact, and talking about what it means for the families. And whether, and I don't know, GR, you can answer this, whether if that would be like the last time we did boundaries, there was like some grandfather rules, some transition time. Is that boundary committee that decided that, or was it a recommendation from boundary committee that went to the board? And then I know ultimately the board decides, but just
I don't think that was a recommendation from the boundary committee. I think that was what the board decided to do when they made the decision. The boundary committee can certainly make that recommendation, but I think last time that was straight from the board made that decision on top of the recommendation that came from boundary.
Yeah, I remember us throwing that around, discussing it quite a bit with Kyle and others, what the basic, what the scenarios possibly could be. And then, the board ultimately made the decision, but we came up with different scenarios.
I did add Patrick Brown. He was over in the attendee, but he's actually a member of the boundary committee. Well, welcome, Pat. I just added you to the panelists in case you had questions or wanted to add anything. So based off of what I just shared and what GR and Ron said, what information do you feel like you would need in order to start to talk about the various scenarios? To help you, you know, I know everybody has the RSP information, so that would be one thing, but what additional information would you need, or do you need time to think about it? Or it is, as we're going through, you may need more information, but is there anything that's coming up for you specifically around that charge? We would need to, and I can work, we can work with GR and the board. We would need to probably establish a timeline, like if we're saying this is for the 22-23 school year, to work backwards. This is when a decision would need to be made. So this is the timeline that we will engage the staff and students that will be impacted. And if a decision is made to do that, then that allows for transitions and that kind of thing. So what other information would you need based off of just that, knowing that that's our charge?
I just had a clarifying question. Is that charge coming because we have schools on the west side that are over capacity? So we're wanting to just even it out more throughout the district?
Yes. They are, yeah, at capacity or nearing. And when you look at the projections, if they're not over capacity, they're projected to be. So before we get to that tilting point, to go ahead and alleviate, so we're not at a point and have to make a decision in a short time period because there's no more room. So it's proactively looking at it and then balancing out so that some of our schools that are really under capacity will be more balanced.
I have a question, just since you mentioned Pinckney. Since Pinckney is a title school, how would boundary shifts affect that? If we were looking to add more students to Pinckney, would we also attempt to protect its status as a title school? And, you know, kind of what are those considerations?
So legally, we can't protect the status. The title is determined by the number of percentage of free and reduced lunch students who attend the school. So they may be titled this year, but let's say if a different demographic moved in without us doing anything, if they are no longer at that certain free and reduced lunch percentage, their status would change. And that's something we can't control because it's based off of the percentage of free and reduced lunch students in the school.
I think one thing too, along with what Kelly specifically asked for with the Kennedy neighborhoods. I know we don't do boundary shifts very often. I think the last time we did a boundary shift that impacted multiple schools, I think was 2011. But I think any data that we have of any particular boundaries, even if it was minor, that have shifted, I think it would be good to know that, so that as we're looking at this, we can be mindful of shifts or specific areas that have already gone through a boundary shift recently, even if it was a minor one, so we can take that into consideration. So if one happened even that we just can't remember a few years ago, we can just be mindful of not doing that again if we can avoid it. I think having that information at our disposal would be good.
So are you talking about specific neighborhoods, because we're talking about the same schools?
I think any information that we can have, like maybe for the past 10, 15 years, where we've shifted boundaries that have impacted neighborhoods, just to have that, just so we know that it's happened in the past, so that we can be mindful of maybe not, so we don't end up in a situation where we're doing it to the same people over and over and over again. We can maybe just so we have visibility to it, I think, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. Yep, I will get with Ron and Kathy and some others to see the last shifts. We have that information. I wasn't on Boundary. But we have it and we can get that. So that is helpful.
I think I'd also be interested, just as we look at different scenarios, to kind of think about how are we distributing some of the lower SES families between, so we have as mixed income schools as we can within the boundary. I know we have neighborhood schools, so we can't shift people a lot, but I would just be interested, just as we look at different scenarios, to try to have that be a goal.
Okay. My wait time is horrible. In real life, it's really bad on WebEx and those kind of meetings. So I'm telling myself to count to 10.
And I'm not sure how this plays into it, but if we do some shifting of elementary boundaries, then do we need to be mindful of how that affects a couple of our middle schools?
Yeah, so that is something, just being mindful of that, because it could then inadvertently impact the high schools. And we know where Free State stands in comparison to Lawrence High, so being mindful of that. So yes. Well, that for now is all that I had. Are there other things outside of the comprehensive elementary that this committee, that somebody wants to share? If not, we can end early tonight. We won't add another meeting because, I mean, like, the last time we had to meet in between, we'll just have our regular meeting. And then I think we would have to make a determination, because I don't think we're scheduled in the summer, if we would have a summer meeting or two to stay on track, or just pick it back up in August. Because our next meeting, which I'll make sure we have all the information, is May 20th. And then I don't think we have anything scheduled for June, but we can make a we do, we have something June 17th. We're not scheduled in July, so it probably works out from there.
I did have a question. I know that the board was wanting us to look at elementary schools, and that seems like a good plan. But when was the last time a review was done at the middle school or high school level for boundaries?
I've been here 14 years. When you shift elementary, it naturally sometimes impacts middle, but high school is pretty clear on like 15th Street, not 15th. Is 15th right or 19th? I get confused.
15th
Street. That is that. So it naturally impacts it. One of the challenges, this came up at budget, the Budget and Program and Evaluation Committee last night. We would want to do it in segments because we would want to know the impact before we could not, as a committee, really do them simultaneously. honestly. We would need to settle on elementary to see how that impacts middle, to see how that impacts high school, but to see how it impacts middle, and then determine from the board, that is something that they would want to take on or evaluate. We could say the committee wants to do this, but ultimately the board would have to give us the charge to do that.
We did make a couple of minor adjustments to the Southwest, Central, and West attendance areas with that last one, but they were like, we had like new growth going in on the west end of town and a couple other things, and we just had to make, and we had a little patch of kids that were really in the west attendance area, but they were going to Central, even though they were back by the Hallmark area. So we made a few little adjustments. It wasn't major by any stretch, but we did cause a little relief to Southwest, and because West had just completed a pretty major construction project and expanded so that they could take on a few more students.
And in that, I remember then Pinckney used to split, and then we sent all of Pinckney to Liberty Memorial Central.
That's right. We did make Pinckney
change their high school because if they lived north or south of 15th, that was determined. But middle school is south from that. High school, it's really about where you physically live, and middle and elementary and middle was more about where you're feeding into. We did tweak that because I remember the shift. Yeah.
Just a very quick reminder is just that traditionally South Middle School and West Middle School are like complete feeder schools to LHS and to Free State, whereas Southwest and Liberty Memorial are split between the two high schools.
Hey, Anna, Larry's in as an attendee if you want to move him over. And then, yeah, I think looking at middle school makes a lot of sense when we look at elementary school. I think with the recent bond, I think we added enough space at Free State. I don't know that we need to look at high school. I certainly don't want to look at high school. That I don't know that I want to cause that much heartburn in this town to look at high school boundaries if we don't have to. Middle and elementary school boundaries will cause enough heartburn as it is. Just to be honest, because I've done it once before. I think the other thing while we're looking at elementary boundaries that I would like to see discussed at some level to bring back was the one thing that we discussed once would be to look at the possibility of grade centers versus neighborhood schools and what that would look like and what that would entail. So take some schools and pair them and make one K2 and make one 3-5 and see what that would look like from just from all aspects. I think that would be a good discussion for this committee to have as well.
So for whatever reason, it's not allowing me to move Larry over as a panelist. So Larry's just gonna have to watch the recording. Like anybody else, I can highlight and move over. I highlight him, it says I can expel him or refresh him, but I can't move him as a panelist.
I think I totally understand that it would cause a lot of heartburn, but the reason I was asking about the high schools is just, it seems like this is like a line that has been drawn and we haven't looked at in a long time. And because we live in a district where there are like huge graduation rate differences between the two high schools, it seems like all options should be on the table. And is that something that could help with that situation? And I do not know enough about it to know if it would or if that's a horrible idea, but it seems like maybe not right now because we're doing the elementary thing now, but that could be something the board could think about doing in the future.
I don't know if the graduation rate is significantly different. Off the top of my head, I know LVS, which is the virtual schools graduation rate, is very different than Free State and Lawrence High, but their I mean, one may be higher, but it's not like one is like 95 and the other is like 75. I'm not minimizing that, but I don't think they're, the last time I recall, maybe you know off the top of your head, but I don't recall them being significantly different.
No, I thought they were like 8 or 9 percentage points different, but I don't know. I could be wrong. You
Oh,
all know the data more than I do, so.
No, honestly, I don't recall. I just don't remember it striking me as being significant, but that doesn't mean that it's not. So we can look at that. Yeah.
And Nikki, I didn't mean to imply that I wasn't willing to talk about it. That's not where I'm coming from. I think it's a natural progression. I think we start at elementary and see where that gets us and see how that impacts middle and see where that gets us. And then if it leads us into the high school, I mean, if it does, it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I think we start at the bottom and then we work our way up and see where it gets us on the timeline that it gets us there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to start with elementary because we have some pending capacity issues there. So yeah.
Yeah.
And I had a quick clarification. You had said Zach could come to a future meeting and kind of show us some scenarios. Will he just bring scenarios? We don't need to provide any direction around exactly which kinds of scenarios we want to look at. We just look at the centralized schools.
So he can do whatever. He won't necessarily bring scenarios next, like based off of this, we'll bring this information. And what he will do next time is to say, the capacity, like Pinckney could take 80 kids or Hillcrest could take 50 kids. So that as we're looking at and thinking about scenarios and seeing those things, what would that mean? But his
Okay.
scenarios would come after you have that specific information.
Okay, that was my question. So we'll build out
Have a
scenarios.
specific scenario like GR, like grade centers, I can write it down. And as he's putting the stuff together, he can place it. I mean, he can just have it at the forefront if that's what people would like to see.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
So I just looked it up, Nikki, you're right, it's about 8 to 9, depending on which year you look at. Any other questions, things you would like to see before we part ways? Well, thank you all for your input, and thank you for your input regarding repurposing Kennedy. As GR said, we do a comprehensive, it will cause some heartburn, but our charge as a group is to look at all the scenarios and then share that information with the community, and we get their feedback, and we'll probably use a similar process like we did with Kennedy so that the board can have all of the information in totality and make a decision from there. Okay, I won't keep you all unless something is coming up. We'll meet again in May. Don will send out the minutes and we'll share this information with Zach, and then we can bring some preliminary information about where the relief is needed and where they can possibly go. Thank you.